welcome everyone. Delighted to have you all here for this really interesting event this evening on light, waste and the environment, lighting for dark skies. My name is Siobhan. I'm a member of the West Region Committee. We're really delighted to have Brian Espey and Georgia McMillan here with us this evening, two brilliant speakers. Brian is an associate professor in the School of Physics at Trinity College Dublin and has been working in the field of light pollution since 2009. Brian is a co-founder of Dark Sky Ireland, whose background is as an amateur then professional astronomer, lately working as a European Space Agency astronomer supporting the Hubble Space Telescope. And Georgia McMillan is the Mayo Dark Sky Park Development Officer and co-founder of Dark Sky Ireland. Georgia has been an active campaigner for dark skies since 2013. And in 2018, she received Outsider Magazine's Eco Hero Award for her work on the Mayo Dark Skies project. Georgia was recently invited to join the International Committee of the International Dark Sky Association as a European representative. So I'll hand over to Brian, who will present first, and then Georgia, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So over to you, Brian.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. So tonight, this is a talk of two halves. So I'll be starting with a little bit about the background and the sort of the number crunching, and then Georgia will follow in with some details about the activism side, if you like, and the engagement side, and just the general background, a wider field, and then we'll field questions at the end. So initially what I want to start with is the outline, which is to give you some context of light pollution. It's quite a broad church, a broad topic with many different aspects. Some of you may know some aspects and some others. So it's trying to encompass all of this in a shortish talk, but we can answer specific questions at the end. So I want to move from the general situation then to the Irish situation. Discussion a little bit about how light pollution arises and light pollution impacts, and maybe finish up with a few comments about what we can do. So first of all, let's look at light to space. So if we look at the global picture there in the bottom right, we can see that there's light all over the Earth. Now this has grown over the years. You can see it traces human activity. It's currently growing at about between 2 and 6% annually, so a minimum around 2% of light increase going out into space. The pictures at the left show you some aspects. So if we go back, say, to the 19th century, cities would be much darker. The introduction of gas lighting and oil lighting, and then the electric light, as we see in the picture there in the middle. The idea that we have trouble with lighting, you can see in this cartoon here, the lights were very bright. So for instance, when they used arc lighting, it was incredibly bright and glary. It was actually quite dangerous to stare at for a long period of time. But the picture at bottom left, the graph there shows you something interesting, which I only found relatively recently, which is the cost of lighting. So you can see that for a long period back from the Middle Ages, the cost of lighting was quite high. Basically, you wanted to build a fire, you had to go collect the wood and spend a long time doing it. But as energy became cheaper, and particularly with the introduction of electric light, so it facilitated the use of light and the brightening of our nighttime environment. And this has led, as that has increased in scope and also reduced in terms of cost, this has led to the increasing use of light at night and the positive benefits that go with it. But the result, as we see, is that there's a brightening of our whole environment. To put it in a European context, if we compare an image taken in the 1990s with one about 20 years later, you can see, if I toggle between it, what the impacts are. So the cities are bright to start with, but what we're seeing is a spread of light out into the general environment. And particularly in the case of Ireland, you can see there's a low level of light increasing across the countryside. And if we move and look at a map where red shows an increase in light and blue shows a decrease, we can see again in the case of Ireland, except for the areas that you can't build on, such as bogs, mountains, and so on, that there has been a spread of lighting. This is probably being driven by a lot of one-off housing, people moving to more affordable locations. So under the Celtic Tiger, the increase in prices and increase in development, this has led to a spread of lighting, a spread of people down the countryside, and then that brings with it additional growth in light through commercial retail aspects as well. If we look at the historical trend, it's quite impressive how much light has increased. And the top graph then shows results from looking at satellite data for the Republic. The bottom line shows Northern Ireland, which is a nice control we like to do in science, is to have some sort of a control. There's similar sort of lighting installations, there's similar sort of lighting practices. So we can see that there's a genuine difference between the Republic and Northern Ireland. And there's a growth of about 10 times the rate in the Republic, until we hit the period where the Celtic Tiger turned a little bit sour. And you can see that also in the use of electricity, for instance, it levels off. Take home we should get from this is that development brings with it increase in light use. We've got more area to light. And also that when the economic boom stops, this light stays with us. So unless we do something actively to change our practices, we're increasing the light burden over time. And presumably now this will start to move again as the economy moves on further. So there's a strong housing drive, but then also, as I said, along with the housing, there's going to be commercial and retail effects as well. And public lighting is a big part of local authority budgets. So it's a general good idea to actually look at this in a little bit more detail and see, can we reduce costs? Can we reduce light burden? This is sort of a bit of a brew of different types of lighting. You'll see different examples from festival lighting, if you like, architectural lighting, and then top right, there's two examples. A floodlight from the bottom up. A lot of that light's going to miss the facade and go on up. Floodlighting from the top down. I'm not sure it does any great support for the architectural heritage if it's overly lit, and that's something that Georgia will return to in the second half of the talk. Then we've got commercial lighting, we've got government buildings as well, which were not illuminated back in the oil crisis, for instance, but are now increasingly illuminated as LED technology becomes cheaper. And then of course housing and the growth of the glass box extension will also increase the amount of light. If we look back at an oldish image, 2008 in Dublin, and we just look at a couple of areas, the Phoenix Park, and then there's Croke Park. We can see it had me confused, but that's actually to make the grass grow. Custom House there, the lighting along the Liffey, we can see the lighting is visible from space about 400 kilometers up. And then we move on to 2015 and zoom in on the city center. You'll notice there's actually an increase in colored lighting. So again, LED lighting is coming to the fore, and it's been used architecturally, and it's starting to make an impact. This is additional lighting on top of the public lighting. And from estimates we've done with students, it looks like in the center of the city, maybe half of the lighting is due to non-public sources. So it's an indication of where things are happening at night. You want to keep people going into places like Temple Bar at late night, you want them to feel secure. Then the light level is increasing, and then there's competition between the different spots to make themselves, more attractive. In terms of the lighting burden, there's a large number of lights. Actually, I think it's about 180,000 public lights. A large amount of energy is used. Most of it's unmetered. It's driving the case as well because of the cost, and the carbon budget is to actually improve the efficiency of the lighting. There's architectural flood lighting, as we see, formerly, the Custom House and so on. And then there's also the residential lighting. And the example at bottom right, you'll notice there's a range of lights on the outside of this house. One is very blue. A lot of that light is going out into the environment. And with the number of households, if one light in the private residence is used for outside lighting, that can be the equivalent of the amount of light produced by public lighting, which is a lot more controlled. So for instance, the poor security lighting, for instance, can add significantly to the lighting budget in terms of the number of photons produced compared with public lighting. There's also a lot of use for decorative lighting. These examples here for oldie worldy type lights that are in use. You'll see the top example. the diagram shows you an indication of the distribution of the light as it goes out into space. So some of the light's going on the ground as we would expect, not so much right below it because it's post-mounted, but you'll notice there's a proportion of light emitted directly up into space, bouncing around in the lantern and going up into space. And surprisingly, in a way, the one at bottom, which is one of these globe lights, is actually a little bit better controlled in terms of the upward light. But both have a component going out sideways. And we've added to that with lots of other lights. The example at top left there showing you this trend towards LED billboarding. And if you look at the site at night, it is over bright compared with the surroundings. It's set for daytime to make an impact. But, you know, when people are 2 or 3 in the morning, how many people are looking at it, and can you even bear to stare at it? And then there's the overlit areas outside, the takeaway shops and so on. There's some architectural lighting there. Again, that's something Georgia will return to in the second half of the talk. The example at the top there, the Masonic Temple in Molesworth Street, you'll notice even by looking at it, very strong shadows, a lot of misdirected light that's just going to go out into space. And from the point of view when we look down, this is going to be a lot more visible than the public lighting, for which we see the bounce light off the ground. In terms of the technology for public lighting, things have improved a lot. The table, I wouldn't worry too much about the numbers. Again, it's just to give you an indication what's going on. And if we look at this high angle light that would be emitted directly to space, if you think about this, you know, from the point of view of the Hadfield commercial about electricity, it's pretty, we see where people are, that's all well and good. But just remember the other take on that is that light you can see from space is a waste. It's going on out and it's going to disappear out into space. It's not doing any good from there on, it's a cost. So light which has a reduced amount emitted direct into space is a benefit. And the examples there are sort of some of the typical old sodium lights that we would have in the country and still form part of the lighting inventory. The low pressure sodium, the orange lights, the high pressure sodium, the sort of a pinky light, and then the new LEDs, generally bluish white or neutral white, they call it. And we can see that the direct light goes down dramatically because the new technology allows that to be much more controlled. And the high angle light can actually be a reasonable part of the budget from the point of view of these lights, because some will be bounced off the ground. That's something that we have to deal with, even for a relatively dark road surface, nominally 7% reflectivity, then a proportion of that light is going to go out into space. And again, the diagrams at the right show this in terms of the photometry, the detail. Again, you see the older low pressure sodium, a large amount of that light is going directly out into space. It's not going down onto the road surface. So to compensate for that, then, you know, you needed to use more power in the lamps. So that's one of the trends, is moving towards LED technology, light emitting diode technology. The design can actually constrain the light a lot better. We can have more flexibility. The other big advantage that we come back to is that you can turn them on and off quickly, which you can't do with the old lights. You notice they take a while to warm up, and that has to be built into the lighting hours that the public lighting system uses. In terms of the type of light, you know, the worst light, these globe lights, you can see the type of light there shown in the little diagram, and above it is an idea of what it does to the sky. So you can see it contributes a lot to the scattering of light in the sky. A good way of seeing this, actually, if it's anyway foggy, go out and have a look, and you know, if you can see the beams of light, you can tell where they're going, or you see shadows above the trees, you can see that light is going to be misdirected. And then we go through progressive examples of what we call cutoff, to restrict the light going up into space, but also out into the environment. In terms of the light pollution adjacent to one of these locations, a town, then it's the light that's near the horizontal plane, certainly slightly above the horizontal plane, but also close to the horizontal plane. Because if you think about it, light will tend to propagate out. Yes, it might bounce around, but it will still tend to work its way outwards into the environment. And work I've just done shows that this may be even more extreme for small towns where the obstructions tend to be low and the buildings tend to be low, the streets can maybe be a bit wider. So light can actually travel a long way from its source. And even in the case of a big town or a big city which has a lot of buildings, for instance, we can see the glow from Dublin from as far away as Wales. So let's look at this. Here's a picture from Mace Head taken by Ray Butler of NUIG. And it shows this beautiful Milky Way panorama. There's the International Space Station going over, and then we see some glow on the horizon. So when we've looked down and shown the initial pictures, you can see the points of light. And in this Dublin city, you can see the points of light, the origin of that light. But of course, we're generally viewing it from the ground. So what we see is light that's actually scattered. And the diagram at top right gives you an idea about the sort of budgets we're dealing with. So you're going to put a large amount of your light, hopefully, in the area that you're interested in. Some of that light will bounce off the ground and go up into space. Some of it will be emitted directly into space, depending on the quality of the optics and the type of technology you're using. Some of that light is designed to spread a little bit further, for instance, maybe behind the lamp pole, just to illuminate paths. In cities, it's also a little bit higher than it is in maybe rural locations where you don't want to go into the hedgerows. And some of that light may end up on windows of adjacent houses where maybe it's not required. Could be called light trespass. We don't actually have a legal definition of that, but better term might be intrusive light that's causing nuisance value. So this light scatters up into the sky. A beautiful illustration of this is at the bottom right, which is this two images taken from exactly the same location, but courtesy of a large electrical problem in the northeast of the United States. I think this was in Connecticut. The electricity went out, and you can see from the same location, the same night, that if you remove the light, you return back to the natural environment. There is a little bit of glow from towns which are much further away, but you can see the massive change it makes to the sky. Maybe about 3% or so of the photons are scattered through aerosols and particles and the air molecules themselves. But remember, in a dark environment, adding a little bit of light causes a great dilution of the natural sky, which is much, much weaker. So from daylight, full daylight, to say moonlight, there's about a factor of 1,000,000 in terms of brightness. When we use artificial light, we're actually quite inefficient at using it. If we crank the light up, then we may only use about 1 in 60 million photons. And again, that's something we need to think about. It's not just the efficiency of producing light, it's the wanton waste we're generating that has a consequence in the environment in general. The picture at the bottom left just brings out something which I think we're all appreciative of here in Ireland, that since it's cloudy for about 2/3 of the time, when it's overcast, we really notice the effect of this light going out into space, because the clouds act as a reflector and bounce that back down to the ground. And certainly in Dublin, for instance, you'll probably notice that it's as bright as the full moon or slightly brighter at the ground level because of this light reflected down. So this is light that maybe we're not normally sensible of. It's a constant waste. It's a tendency to maybe be out of sight, out of mind. And it's only if that light comes back to us that we directly appreciate its effect. So the light going up into space, these little points we see, is one part of the issue. The light that's actually scattering back down to the ground and traveling direct out into the environment, that's an issue from the environmental point of view for us as well. As an illustration of this, if we go back to 1997, here's a model of if you take those light sources and predict how that light scatters back to the ground. If you go to one of these locations, how bright would that sky appear to be relative to the natural sky? And we can see, particularly in the case of the big cities, they have a much bigger impact than just the lit area. They extend out into the countryside, and for instance, the light from Dublin extends out into Kildare and Wicklow. It has a big impact on the neighboring structures. And this is a sort of non-linear scale, it's just to bring out different details. In the dark green, then, there are areas that are close to natural, and we go all the way up to those white areas which don't really show up in the table there. But they're scarily bright areas where you never have dark adaptation. So about 18.5% of the population never uses its night vision. They're working on a mesopic vision, a mixture of daytime and nighttime. And if we move forward to 2015, you can see what's happened is the spreading of light across the countryside. And what it means, it's getting rid of the fainter stars first because they're quite weak. It's sort of like if you think as we move into twilight, or as we go from evening twilight into nighttime, as the light level drops, then the fainter stars become visible. For a city, for instance, we might only see about 100, 150 stars. In the countryside, it might be 5,500, 6,000 stars. But also the Milky Way will disappear. And if we lose that, then it could be in the situation where a large majority of the people will never ever see the Milky Way. And this is likely to be the case, I think, in the US and most of Europe. They reckon there's maybe about 80% of the people will never see the Milky Way unless they travel away from the location. And this is something to bear in mind. Not only are we influencing the environment, but on the other hand, if we can actually retain darkness, then it's a resource then that we can use as a part for our tourism. And Georgia will be talking about that later as well. So the light travels into the environment. The picture at the top there shows a view from Wales, about 140, 150 kilometers away. So most of the Irish population sees degraded skies. As I said, the wild areas such as Ballycroy and Mayo and Kerry, Dark Sky Reserve, basically areas where not a lot of people live. So most people who are living in urban or semi-urban areas are going to see a night sky affected by light pollution. And the images at the right give you an idea between what it looks like at my home. If the connection is good and the image is good, you might just barely make out the plow in that image compared with an image at the top, which shows you what it should look like under a near pristine sky. So it's also having an influence. It's affecting astronomy, if you like. It's separating us from the environment. Effectively, it's like being in a light box or under a cloudy sky. It's sort of cutting you off from something that culturally we would have been associated with. So it has an effect on both us and the environment. And it has a longer distance effect. The image at the bottom right, if you look at this, it's sort of scary. There is very good public lighting in that case, but it's sort of wiped out by housing estate, low pressure sodium lighting, and also some pub illumination there. And what you'll notice is even in this country area that close to Wicklow town, we can see the tree by its silhouette against what should be a dark sky. And there's also light there from Rathdrum, which is much further away. So the light, the number of stars visible increases as we move away from the city of Dublin, just due to Dublin itself, but locally we can really disturb the environment as well, and we're losing the natural environment. So what does this light do? It's a nuisance. It upsets astronomers, but you might say, who really cares about astronomers? But it does separate us from our environment, and it has an environmental impact. We're probably well aware that you see lights such as one here. I was very surprised to see it in this light after it was installed, that I was finding tree leaves at December. So the tree was hanging onto its leaves because it was able to photosynthesize. And that's because the emission from this LED actually has a peak where the chlorophyll absorbs, so the tree can still generate energy. So it's hanging onto the leaves, but it's stressing the tree at a time that it should be nice and relaxed over the winter and storing energy in its roots rather than having sap moving up and down the tree, which leaves it subject to stress in terms of cold weather. But also, of course, if you hang onto the leaves, then with the high winds of winter as well, it's causing disruption to the tree. It also has an effect then that the activity of the tree and bud burst can actually change. That as the warmer weather comes in, we're aware as well with climate change, things are bursting. Bud burst happens a little earlier, things flower a little earlier. But if we add light as well, the plants can actually take that as an indication of an early spring and start to get going a little bit early. And as we've seen in the case of our weather recently, you get a cold snap, that can really set things back because they've started putting out delicate shoots. You'll get it frostburn and so on. We're familiar with the effect on moths from our own case with the lights. An example at bottom right shows you the noticeable difference. Same environment. We have two lights here. One has got a slightly blue-rich component, which attracts a lot more insects. The other one has a slightly warmer colored lighting, slightly more yellow lighting, and you can see hardly any insects in comparison. So moths, for instance, are attracted to these lights, and that leads to a knock-on effect that predators may able to pick them off, may also change the morphology. In the last week or two, I saw a paper saying, looking at specimens in museums, you can see that there have been subtle changes in, for instance, the eyes of moths in areas that have been more brightly lit than others. So it has a knock-on effect. They're important prey species. A lot of insects are nighttime insects. They're also important as pollinators, which we realized is a very important property that insects perform. Coupled with the insects then, if you're a small agile bat, you might go in and scoop up some of those insects. The larger bats tend to avoid light. And this is a problem because we may actually see an increase in bats in some areas, but that will reduce biodiversity because the smaller bats will outcompete the larger. The other issue then is if we badly light, as an example at the bottom is part of an ecological test. They lit an area of hedgerow. The bats will tend not to cross that. It'll be a boundary line. They tend to fly low so they're not visible against the sky. But if you have lighting at the low level, the bigger bats are worried about predation by owls and will stay away from it. So that may also cause issues. So even if the bats are not local to that area, if they can't actually traverse across that from their roost to the feeding area, it'll have an impact on their behavior. And that's something to think as we produce more greenways and more walking areas. If we light those, we may be having an effect on the environment that we're going to see. Birds are also affected by light. You may have been familiar with birds singing during the night. I know I've heard cases of robins singing in the middle of the night at around Christmas time, close to street lights. And what we have here is a series of birds. They tend to have their own slots in terms of time, so they don't compete directly. And we see moving from the chaffinch to the tits to the blackbirds and the robins that they sing at slightly different times, given by the left-hand scale, the time relative to sunrise. So we see what the green line is as we move from left to right, that there is an onset, an earlier start in the chorus as the season progresses. But in a lit area, this is much more severe. So the robin may sing about 2 hours earlier than sunrise, about an hour earlier than it would normally sing. So this is going to have an impact on the timing of the bird's day. It's competing for resources, and then also nesting behavior has been found. And some of these birds tend not to become mature where they should have been. So it has an effect. Also shearwaters, we have shearwaters around the Irish coast. When they take off from their nest, this is an example from the Balearic Islands, but it shows the same sort of behavior. What the nestlings can't really fly, but they're going to head away from the nest. So they see a light, they assume it's the moonlight shining on the water, and that's where food will be. So they head down to it, and then they discover there's no food, and the parents won't come to visit because it's a lit area. Then it leaves them there to eventually just die. They just sit there until they run out of food and starve. There's also effects on fish, which are probably not appreciated. We've got areas where good salmon and trout rivers, and also maybe eels. They're also affected. They have a cycle. They're sensitive to light and predation. So when we light up bridges and we put in more lighting, or in a rural case, for instance, if we have a bridge where the public lighting maybe is not so well controlled, you can create a lit barrier, just as we do in the case of the bats. And for salmon, for instance, I think that the barrier is about 1/3 of full moonlight levels. It will not cross that. So it can have an impact beyond the intended area of use of the lighting. Why are LEDs a particular problem right now? The example there at the bottom left shows a range of light in terms of color. So the left one is high pressure sodium. The middle one is what we call warm white light. And the one at the right is the type of light about what we call 4,000 Kelvin. the color of the light is represented as if it was heating up a body, a black body. So this is really an old-fashioned description, an incandescent description. The more I heat it up, the more it'll glow. But the technology has really moved on and it doesn't use that same method. But it's sort of been conventional wisdom that these 4,000 Kelvin lights look like moonlight. Now, being a physicist, of course, I took a smartphone and a little diffraction grating. So I've aligned these so that the light is in the same in both position in both cases, and then the spectrum is spread out the same way. The top image there shows you the top image shows you the moon, the bottom image shows you a street light. And you can see there's a difference in that the street light has an extra component here at the violet end, which we're not really sensible to, but our night vision is. And shown in the picture above, then we can see, if we represent in terms of the intensity, that there's quite a sharp peak in terms of the light output. And you can see the other curve then shows you what the moon looks like. So it, just as a sunset on an LED television looks like a sunset, it isn't just as this lighting looks maybe to our eyes like moonlight. It is definitely not. And we notice that as well, that this peak is there because usually people say the light looks a lot brighter. That's because our night vision is partly active under street lights, and we're seeing the effect of this. Our body's telling us it's seeing a lot more light than it expects, and it seems brighter, and it also seems glarier, which poses an issue for older people as well. So increasing the light has an effect. This light travels out to the environment, particularly if it's at more or less horizontal angles, bounces out into the environment. The thing of this dilution of the sky also has an effect in terms of the dilution of the monthly cycle here for a dark area in Connemara. If you look at the bottom part of those curves, each of those is over the time of a month, is the light going from twilight down to midnight and back up the other side. And as the moon phase changes, then some of the night is lit by the moon. But the bottom base level is actually telling you that it gets dark if we look at the image in the middle at new moon. And then if we look at the case, so we see a cycle from light to dark to light. And if we look plot a line on it, it goes something like that. If we look at the case for the city of Dublin, you can see that instead of being at the natural sky level, it's about 25 times the natural sky level. So it looks like full moonlight in the sky all year round. What effect does that have other than the environment? There are issues with regards to human health as well. We have a sensor. It's not part of our color vision, but basically it's sensitive to blue light. And that's the one that gives us our circadian rhythm. It tries to synchronize our body clocks to daytime. The blue light in the morning, you've probably seen, we've all been working indoors a bit more. They say, get out, get some sunlight. That's because it'll synchronize our system to the 24-hour cycle. Circadian, roughly a day, our system runs on these free running clocks, and the outside input actually tells us something about when we should restart that cycle. I heard today about a group that went down a cave, and some of the people had days that were around 30 hours long. That would be their natural cycle when the daylight is removed. Again, this is an issue with the different type of lighting, that the peak in this blue actually affects our body's clock. And what it does is suppress something called melatonin. And the LED, the blue LED, has a lot more effect than older lighting. And we look down at candlelight, for instance, feels a lot more comfortable and a lot easier on our environment. So you've probably seen when you use your electronic devices, move to warmer light, use a lighting control to actually remove that light so that it lets your body recover. And the example here is showing on the left cases where light is shining on bedroom windows. There's a street light at the bottom. It's also tilted at an angle, so the light is misdirected. But at the picture at the right shows you it's basically the levels of this sleep hormone in our system. In two cases, the green one shows you what happens when the people were wearing green goggles, and the blue one shows you when they were sensitive to the blue part of the spectrum. And when you turn the lights on, for the people who could see the blue, you can see their hormone levels are a lot lower, meaning that it was a lot harder to settle. And if you've been exposed to this light or you have this light coming into your bedroom, it can disrupt the time before you actually get to sleep, so you don't sleep as well. And that's been found in a study that I've been involved with here in Ireland too. So in the urban environment, we should think about this when we design. How much light is wasted is very important, but the placement of light, for instance, may be a sustainability, but also a human rights issue or a social justice issue. If you're living in the middle of a city, you mightn't have any control on the amount of light that's there. And some of these lights are placed high up so that you don't have poles in the street. It looks like a nice uncluttered environment, but you need to be aware that that light can have a strong impact on people who are living in the inner city. So in terms of the conclusions, we have evolved to deal with the natural cycle, and we've evolved to synchronize with the cycle. What's happened, particularly since the onset of electric light and the development of LED lighting, is we've used more and more light. And we've used that in order to extend our day. That's useful in some cases, but we need to be aware that nothing comes without a cost. This extra light then disconnects us from the natural cycle, disconnects us from the environment. We lose our sensitivity to the general environment. We're going to be very focused on what's lit. And it's also counterproductive in a lot of cases. When it's overlit, your pupil reduces in size. If you look up, I've heard people say the sky looks dark in the city. That's because your pupil's so small you can't see the light. But if you go out into your back garden, for instance, you'll probably see color in the sky, even though you shouldn't be seeing color at low light levels. So it separates us from the environment, and it's a shared experience, particularly since we're sensitive to engagement with the environment. That's going to be important. And seeing the sky gives us a sense of wonder. Again, if we grew up under continuously cloudy skies, would we ever ask questions about where we came from, our position in the universe, even move, on the Apollo trip? Would we have gone to the moon, and would we have looked back and seen the importance of stewardship of our own planet? And this is becoming more to the fore. Light may not be the most important stressor in some cases, but it could be an additional stressor on top of the climate change. And we shouldn't just purely be thinking of energy and carbon, we should be thinking about the photon budget. If we can produce light more cheaply, should we do that? Should we not actually consider the amount of light we're producing and whether it's appropriate? And in the last week in the EU, the decision's been made. It's not legally required at the moment, but it's likely that legal or laws will be based on this, is a move to actually reduce the amount of light produced. So rather than just purely energy or carbon as being a driver, we should now maybe think about light per se. The advantage is that light is the only form of pollutant which will disappear when we flick the switch. The effects may be longer term, but it's something we can have a direct input in, and we can all take action ourselves. So on that note, I think I'll pass over to Georgia to take up the story. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to pick up really from the advocacy side, the local communities, the project that we are working on mainly in Mayo, but also to introduce you to Dark Sky Ireland and our network, so you have an idea of what we are doing here in Ireland. And hopefully if we can be of help, or if we can collaborate in some way, we are working with a lot of different organizations at the moment. So collaboration, we think, is the way forward on this. So I will kick on. So the Dark Sky Ireland movement, it's been around for a long time. So in the early 2000s, it was known as the Irish Light Pollution Campaign. So, I mean, the type of light we were dealing with then was much different to what we have now, as Brian's outlined. But obviously it was still an issue because we had things like sky glow. We didn't have the blue-rich consequences that we have at the moment, but there was still a lot of light pollution. So Albert White and Colin O'Brien were the founders back in the early 2000s. And then much later, a network of volunteers at a Dark Sky event got together. So representatives from all around the country, from Dublin, from Mayo, from Cork, from Kerry, Northern Ireland, formed as a network. And with permission of Albert and Colin, we use the name Dark Sky Ireland. So that's the background. So obviously we're raising awareness of light pollution, what we can do about it. We work with the International Dark Sky Association, who are based in Tucson in Arizona, and they are I suppose, the global authority for accrediting official dark sky places around the world. So here in Dark Sky Ireland, we provide policy as far as we can, best practice for public lighting. We have, it is voluntary, so we're kind of limited on what we can provide at the moment, but we have a fairly full website with guidelines, toolkits, and information that might be of use for advocacy. So having a look at the dark sky places, I just wanted to, I suppose, to highlight the 3 official places in Ireland at the moment. So we have, since 2014, we have the Kerry International Dark Sky Reserve with a gold tier. We have, since 2016, here in Mayo, the International Dark Sky Park. And then more recently, up in Northern Ireland, near the Sperrins, we have Ohm Dark Sky Park and Dava Forest Park. So you can see the obvious places that Brian touched on earlier. The Western Seaboard lends itself to darker areas. And this hasn't gone unnoticed by the likes of Fáilte Ireland. This is a map of the hotspots for tourism. And you can see up here in Mayo, at least, we're in lesser hotspots. So it does lend itself already to sustainable tourism. It's a winter concept. There are benefits from that point of view to engagement for the local communities in the off season. Just to introduce how we started in Mayo, it came from a student project with GMIT Castlebar, and we really have been a grassroots upwards organisation. So it was a group of volunteers around from Newport, Mulranny and Ballycroy who engaged with the National Parks and Wildlife Service, with, I've got Trinity College there, Dublin, meaning Brian Espey, basically, who loaned us equipment and helped us with the scientific background to get this off the ground. The local communities are really very much a part of this, and we can't do anything without their support because of the kind of sensitivities we're talking about with our lighting, our nighttime environment. Fáilte Ireland are very on board now, as is Mayo County Council, who have done a lot of work on the lighting here in Mayo and are really leading the way on that warm toned lighting that Brian was showing you. So the spectrum of 2700, the Kelvin temperature of 2700 is what we've been aiming for on lighting for road lighting. Then we have the International Dark Sky Association, who are the accrediting authority that I mentioned earlier there. So we have a dark sky park in Mayo. It's very similar to other dark sky designations. A park is the classification because of the kind of land ownership that's here. We are using the site of a national park, so we have the benefit of the, I suppose, half the park is after dark. The daytime conservation meets very closely with the nighttime goals for keeping darkness preserved. And the International Dark Sky Association define it as a park possessing exceptional starry skies, a natural nocturnal habitat, which is important for us. And I've just highlighted these words: educational, cultural, scenic, and natural resource. So people sometimes just think it's about astronomy. It's not. It's about a lot of different things. And dark skies, as Brian was showing on some of those graphs, you can see moonlight casts quite a bright light, a natural light. So we're really talking natural skies as opposed to just dark skies. A couple of examples of our local surroundings here in Ballycroy. We have the Letterkeen, if anyone's familiar with the area, the Letterkeen Bothy in Waldnafen, and just on the road there towards Ballycroy Village, which is where our visitor centre is for the National Park and for the Mayo Dark Sky Park. So I said it's more than just astronomy, and dark skies really fits very well with the Sustainable Development Goals. It offers not just scientific education, but research and background for ecology. There's a whole conference going on at the moment called Artificial Light at Night, a 3-day conference, and that's bringing researchers from all over the world together about primarily lighting, light pollution, but also other themes that are connected with it. Biodiversity, as Brian has touched on there, benefits from keeping our skies pristine, as does our own human health and well-being. Education, energy reduction. So these are messages that we use to approach different organizations to partner with us. So in some cases, it might be the local authority. They'd be more interested in the energy saving, the climate actions. If it's wildlife, then we'd be talking about the biodiversity benefits. And it's about adjusting, for us anyway, it's about adjusting our message to speak to the right partner. Just a couple of the challenges that we had when we were first talking about dark skies, especially in West Mayo, where we didn't get electrification until quite late in the 70s. So in fact, Ballycroy was the last place in Mayo to be electrified. So there is certain connotations when you're talking about darkness, and we are trying to preserve the dark skies. So it's a cultural connection that we have to address. We have to recognize it first and then address it. And I think what's happened here now is there's the sense of pride that we do have this kind of rural, I suppose, privilege and asset that a lot of places, certainly in more urban areas, will never have until they address it with the lighting. So hopefully that has now gone from perhaps a negative at first. It was almost like we were holding back economic development by promoting dark skies. Whereas now, in fact, we're doing the opposite. It's quite a visionary kind of concept. So I think communities have now embraced that. And I think that's important, especially for rural communities. So what we've been doing in Mayo, we're quite events driven. We have 2 major events per year at the moment, and that will increase. We have in the autumn, we have our Mayo Dark Sky Festival. And in spring, we have the International Dark Sky Week. Both of which the last 2 occurrences have been, for obvious reasons, have been online, but we do hope to go back to a physical presence as soon as possible. And they have started to attract an international audience, again, when we could facilitate that. We also hosted the European Symposium for the Night Sky, which attracted over 12 different countries to Mayo in November, which is a very new thing for us to host in the west of Ireland in November. To get that number of people from all over the world there just showed the power of the interest really in dark skies and what it can do. We're looking at synergies at the moment and methods to, I suppose, engage not just the daytime, but also the nighttime with the national park. And half the park is after dark is a phrase by an artist in the States called Tyler Nordgren, who designed this poster for our International Dark Sky Park. So what has happened, the National Park's working season has extended a little bit. It's not yet open all through the winter, but hopefully that could be a future goal for Dark Skies to deliver on. We do a lot of outreach and education, also including the local business community and encouraging accommodation during the off season, and guided experiences that local businesses can get involved in. We now have an astronomy club, a very active one here in Newport, which is great, and that will be meeting again as soon as we can get back to normal. And policy, so we've got quite a lot of information on our website for Mayo Dark Sky Park, policies for best practice lighting, as well as Dark Sky Ireland. I'll skip through this one because Brian's covered pretty much all of it. Just one thing I always wanted to point out is the hours that our lighting is on. So no matter how energy efficient our lighting is at the moment, it's still on for nearly 6 months solid per year. And I think that has to be looked at. And ecology, Brian again has touched on that. These are 2 examples from the States. Some of you probably recognize the Luxor in Las Vegas with, you can see the trails of birds here, and the Ground Zero lights in New York, again with birds, and you can just see how the migratory birds are attracted. But even closer to home, some new temporary light installations, albeit they won't be on for very long, but it's just a growing example of using, you know, massive lighting installations as artwork, and something that I think we all need to be mindful of, whereas they are, I suppose, eye-catching. They can, if there's too many of them, then it's going to become an issue. And I think it's something that the authorities need to think about when giving licenses and permission for these. So closer to home, this is our church in Newport. Looking at the architectural lighting here, we had back in 2018 some sodium lights which were replaced with energy efficient floodlights, LEDs, giving this effect on the actual church. Now, just to point out there, that arch and one just behind the tree there is home to swifts that nest there every year. So they are being, I suppose, challenged by the flood lighting. But also, this is the effect seen from about 15 kilometers away, excuse me, from Newport. So light knows no boundaries, as Brian was showing us. This is the viaduct bridge in Newport. Again, with a ecological sensitivity under here with salmon in the river, silver eel, and, you know, apart from the aquatic species, the insects, there's about 24 lights between the arches and the different supports on that bridge originally. So our goal was to tackle that, to make Newport a much more dark sky friendly place. So we've, I'm going to skip through that a little bit. There's a couple more nighttime. We've come up with a concept that a method really for communication for our project, which is rather than hygge, which you are probably aware of means kind of cozy, warm, we wanted to use an Irish word. So to use chole as our concept solution, and that just helps us explain what we're trying to do with community groups and even the authorities. That's behind our lighting plan for Newport. So what we have done is look at some problem areas. We've been speaking to different communities, highlighting the types of lights that are good, the types that are bad. This is probably the most common type of light around that we see. It seems to be a favorite with builders, but again, no shielding, it's light spilling everywhere. It is warm, but it's just not doing what it should be doing, whereas something like this goes straight down and it's warm light, it's efficient, and it's much more discreet. So for our project, we were hoping to look at better lighting practices. We've got a couple of examples here of a church with lighting going straight down. It's illuminating what it should be, the footpath. It still looks nice, it's quite attractive. So our lighting doesn't have to be just functional, it can be aesthetic. And we have worked with some lighting designers as a Heritage Council project. We engaged two Italian lighting designers who had visited Newport for that symposium I mentioned. They looked at the town, they looked at the areas we had in terms of sensitivities, ecology, structure, came up with a vision for nighttime which met with our own objectives and the areas that we needed to keep dark, and taking into account as well the secondary route that we have running straight through Newport. So some lighting has to be appropriate standards to meet with the National Roads Authority. And they've put some designs together to remove the lights off from the front of the church and to put downlighters only where appropriate in these places, and with the bridge to light to the minimum amount in the arches just to have a nice warm glow. Now these are some of the render designs that they've come up with. In Newport we have the Harry Clark window at the back here. So the idea is that this will be gently lit from the inside. It'll be a nice attraction for visitors at night. And then the rest of the building will be downlit only. So we won't have that glow. There's another image, and lighting nearby would be of a similar approach. So it would be warm, it would be down only, it would be wall grazing as opposed to anything going up. These are a couple of examples of minor successes that we've had, just asking the hotel at the time to change the lighting from up lights to down, and all they did was literally turn them around. So it's just, and here was our local water treatment plant where they just replaced one light with another and job was done. The public, excuse me, the public lighting. So the previous N59 through Newport, Mayo County Council replaced those lights with 2700 Kelvin just last year as we were working on the Newport plan. So it made a massive difference, as you can see there, from the sky glow and the quality of lighting to 2700. And again, these two images at the bottom, these are the old sodium and these are the new LEDs. So hopefully Newport with that will be Ireland's first dark sky friendly town. We still have a little bit of a way to go to actually get the designs implemented on the church and the bridge. But we are working with Mayo County Council on that at the moment. So we hope to have good news on that in the future. So our outcomes for having a good lighting plan, I mentioned the sustainable tourism, reducing the light pollution, the aesthetics, and just having a nice nocturnal environment visually is something that fits in with that pride agenda for local people and for tourism, and a reason to visit the town at night and in the off season. And you know, as we all know, the night starts quite early, so it could be 4:30, 5 o'clock in the dark in the winter season. So it does all of the things that we've talked about with sustainable development goals. I suppose in summary, for anyone who wants to get involved or to promote dark skies, always opt for dark sky friendly lighting. Think Hugo or think Chole. Reduce the blue rich content of your lighting. Shield or direct downwards only, and light only when and where you need it in the right intensity. So that those involved in planning or anyone really who can put in submissions, at the moment there's the outdoor recreation policy that's open for consultation. And I think, you know, lighting, especially with the greenways coming up, it's something that we would encourage people to make a comment on with that submission, as well as the outdoor recreation. Excuse me. And for testing light, that's one of the issues that we find, is that light is often not tested after installation. It's put in during the daytime, it's not checked at night, and there's very rare an industry that does that, that puts something in without actually being tested in situ. Okay, and just to collaborate with other groups, so from environmental groups to tourism and lighting in our local authorities. So on that note, I think I'll leave it with a quote that we like to use from Sir David Attenborough. No one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. I think that's very true with dark skies. If you haven't been there, you can't appreciate it, you can't protect it. So on that note, I will stop sharing. Thank you.